Theresa May is fighting to take back control of Brexit today after the High Court ruled she needs MPs' backing before starting negotiations to leave.
The Prime Minister has been speaking to European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncher this morning, with Brussels keen to stress that the call was arranged at Downing Street's request.
Well, it comes as the former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg said that Parliament could block the process unless the government promises a soft Brexit, whilst UKIP's Nigel Farage has backed calls for a snap general election.
Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen is in Downing Street for us. And Tamara, a day of European diplomacy ahead for the Prime Minister.
Yes, Theresa May has been speaking to the EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker this morning. She requested this phone call, and we should be hearing more about that in the next hour. But what we know is that she was going to be saying that it was essentially full steam ahead, that yesterday's court judgment was not going to derail the timetable she has set out, which is that we will be triggering our divorce proceedings from the EU by the end of March next year. The government pinning all their hopes on overturning yesterday's court judgment at the Supreme Court in December. But it is certainly a major setback for the Prime Minister's negotiating strategy, because she had hoped not to reveal her hand until after we triggered Article 50 and got into the negotiations proper. The fear among Brexiteers now is that MPs and peers will not try to stop us leaving the EU, but will hold up the process, potentially by up to a year, or try and impose some of their own conditions. We've already had Nick Clegg saying that his party, who don't forget have over 100 members in the House of Lords, enough to defeat the government if they club together with Labour, could try to impose what is called a soft Brexit with some sort of single market access, perhaps a more relaxed approach to free movement that many in the Tory party don't like the sound of.
Well, tomorrow we're just hearing that Boris Johnson has just arrived in Berlin. Obviously, Brexit will be top of the agenda for talks there, although officially negotiations haven't started. But it's hard to imagine that that wouldn't be part of his talks with his counterpart there in Berlin. So we'll follow that up a little later this morning. But returning to Theresa May, there have been calls for a snap general election. How likely is she to heed that call?
Well, Theresa May's been saying since she got in the summer that she wants the next election to take place in 2020, that she doesn't want to have a snap election before that. Now, Nigel Farage has been out of the traps this morning, saying that he thinks that will be the best thing for her to do in the light of this court case, to try and reassert her authority, her personal mandate over the party. Now, some Conservatives, like Ian Duncan Smith, for example, are saying that Theresa May have to call one early next year if the Brexit negotiations get bogged down by this court judgment. But certainly the party is very split on it, and many in the Tory party have told me today that there is real anger about the speculation about a snap election, and they feel there are actually quite big risks to going to the country at this stage.
Nigel Farage, as you mentioned, one of those calling for that general election, but his party, UKIP, more trouble on the horizon, and other candidates pulled out of their leadership election.
It's hard to keep track of all the twists and turns of the UKIP latest leadership race, but Peter Whittle, who is not exactly one of the household names in the race, has pulled out this morning. He says that he's not going to stand because he feels that the best choice for the role is Paul Nuttall, who is quite a well-known figure, was deputy to Nigel Farage for many years. He's an MEP in the north, and he's actually the leader of UKIP's MEP delegation in Brussels. He's very much the front runner in this race, although the others are Suzanne Evans and John Rhys-Evans, one of UKIP's members in Wales. So Peter Whittle saying that the affection Paul Nuttall is held in and his political experience make him the best suited. He's very much the favourite at the moment in that contest, which will be decided at the end of this month.
OK, Tamara for the minute. Thank you.
Well, let's dwell just a little on that trip being taken by one of the most prominent Brexiteers. Brexit clearly going to be on the agenda when the Foreign Secretary meets his German counterpart a little later today. Boris Johnson is in Berlin for the meeting with Frank Walter 2 days after he was mocked for boasting that he'd make a titanic success of Brexit. Well, joining us live now from Berlin, our senior political correspondent Robert Nisbet. And of course, Brexit will be discussed. Robert, what tone do we assume the discussions will take?
Well, let's hope it's a cordial tone, because remember that Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the Foreign Secretary here in Germany, called Boris Johnson irresponsible the day after the vote on June the 23rd for going off to play cricket after the announcement had been made that Britain had decided to go for Brexit. And the Germans obviously watched very closely, some with bemusement, his elevation to the Foreign Office after he'd made some less than diplomatic references to his foreign foreign counterparts across the European Union. But the two men have met since then, and it is quite a long agenda of items that they're going to be discussing. Of course, Brexit will be there in that High Court decision yesterday, and we expect to hear from Boris Johnson for the first time his reaction to that at a news conference that will be held after the bilateral meeting. But yes, this meeting has been organised for several weeks, so there will be the familiar topics at the top of the agenda. I would say that Syria is likely to be the highest, especially with Russia warning of an impending bombardment of rebel-held eastern Aleppo, opening up those corridors to get citizens and fighters out. The two men will discuss that. They're also likely to talk about Ukraine, and Boris Johnson will be updated on the meeting of the so-called Normandy group of those four nations, Ukraine, Russia, Germany and France, that happened 2 weeks ago. That also to try to restart the Minsk Protocol to try to bring peace to the Donbass disputed area in eastern Ukraine. So that will also be on there. But of course, Brexit will loom large. And I think Boris Johnson will be doing pretty much what Theresa May would have been doing on the phone to the head of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncher. He will be telling him that the diary remains the same as far as Britain is concerned. They expect to trigger Article 50 before the end of March. He will be, I'm sure, outlining that to his German counterpart within the next few minutes. We just saw him sweeping into the Foreign Office here with a cavalcade with the Union flag on the front of the car. I just caught a glimpse of Mr. Johnson in there talking to his special advisor. Plenty of sheafs of paper around, but we can always expect at news conferences following bilaterals with Boris Johnson there'll be some jollity as well as some of the serious issues. I imagine some of the German journalists will be asking him about some of the off-colour references he may have made about his German counterpart in the past.
We look forward to it. Robert, for now, though, thanks very much.